I'm Addison, Brazil. Reef Club, the podcast, starts now. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Grief Club, the podcast, where I take the chapters of my book, First Year of Grief Club, A Gift from a Friend Who Gets It, and use them as launching points for deeper conversations with experts and friends. Today we have Dr. Scott Lyons, author of the upcoming book, Addicted to Drama. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming by. The first thing we always do is we like to take a deep breath and kind of check in. So if you're down, take a deep breath. In one word, how are you feeling physically right now?
Feisty.
I'm going to say jittery.
Jittery.
One word, how are you feeling mentally?
Excited.
I'm going to say childish. In one word, how are you feeling emotionally?
Feisty. It's a fun word to say too.
I'm going to say rambunctious. Can you feel rambunctious? I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I do today, so.
I mean, I have a PhD, so I think I can say yes.
I don't have a PhD, so I don't feel comfortable saying you can feel rambunctious without Googling. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Everyone can tell, and you can tell from my check-in, I'm my inner child woke up with me today, and I've been babysitting all morning, so this will be interesting. But we'll honor the journey, and when all else fails, I'm sure the two of us will find the funny today. To kick things off, I've been doing this with guests lately, and I was going to get rid of it, but then I've had a bunch of people say that it's becoming their favorite thing. So lucky you do it. Using the letters of your name, will you build me an acrostic poem on the spot that describes who you are as a person? Like S.
No.
And the yes and has left the building.
Wow. Language was never my strong point, but I will try to reinvent myself for your show. So S, wow, this is S for super, just super.
Mm-hmm.
C for codfish. Yep. O for orange, because once I got beta carotene poisoning, and I've also used a fake tanner once in my life, and it did not go well. And T for tickles, and another T for tickles. It's like tickled square, and so it's super codfish, orange, tickled square.
Wow.
You're welcome.
If people aren't interested in listening to the rest of this conversation now, I mean, wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So, well, first thing I like to do is to allow you the opportunity to kind of drop in and honor your journey openly. Kind of tell us a little bit about you, and about how you got to the point of showing up in the world the way you do today, especially with this amazing book coming out.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I grew up as an artist, and so my introduction to, or the vehicle I would use to express myself was often big and in performative natures, and not a lot's changed. No, I was in the arts for a long time, and I'd say in my late teens, early 20s, I got introduced to body-oriented psychotherapy. And also another name for that is somatics. And I fell in love with it. It was my introduction to some sense of coming home to myself. And it became apparent, as I started that journey, just how far away I was from myself. And so as I was working in the arts, I went back to school at the same time and started delving into body-oriented psychology, dance therapy, lots of different forms of somatics and healing arts, and was riding both those paths for a long time at the same time. And then in my late 20s, which I ended up getting pretty sick and going through a kind of a soul reinvention tour, as I call it. I decided to leave the arts as it was sort of it was too easy to fall into my patterns around addiction to drama with it, and instead dedicated myself fully to psychotherapy and osteopathy and the healing arts. And while I was in grad school, I wrote a dissertation called "Addicted to Drama," and so used my years in school to really do the research there. And then a few years ago, I felt like it was time to take that dissertation, to take that research, and put it out into the world. And wrote a book called "Addicted to Drama: Healing the Dependency on Crisis and Chaos."
Wow. Yeah. I'm glad that you did. I've been one of the lucky ones to be pre-reading, and we will definitely get into that more. I ask everybody this question before we dive deeper. If a child or somebody who didn't know what the word grief meant walked up to
Mhm.
the street and asked you, what's grief? What does grief mean? How would you
Mhm.
respond?
I would say it's a human process of loss, of absence, of something that was there that is no longer here, and the feelings that remind you of a presence that's no longer here.
Hmm, love that.
You've reached Grief Club. Leave a message after the beep.
Hey Grief Club, it's me, Addie. I wanted to respond to a DM I got after last week's episode asking me, I'm not in my first year of grief. In fact, it's been almost 3 years since I lost my husband. Is First Year of Grief Club still a good book for me to read? I love this question and I get it all the time. And what I like to say back to this is First Year of Grief Club, if you're thinking about gifting it or getting it for yourself, it doesn't have to be the first linear year of your grief or come to you right after any loss. It can just be the first year you decide to commit to experiments in finding resilience within grief. Basically, it's just the first year that you're willing to honor your grief and stop trying to fix it. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please send me them at Share My Grief Club on Instagram. Back to the show.
So jumping into, so the theme of this week that we're sort of launching off point is all about triggers,
Mm,
and sort of trigger warnings and triggers in life. And there's so many phases of that, especially within grief, as I think we both know. Um, and so one of the things that I wanted to start off by doing, because I've been told by readers, and when I spoke about this before, that just being in the presence of people being willing to name their triggers, to say them out loud, what kind of
mm,
comes to mind. And I found when I would hear other people talk about their triggers and list them in this way, you really realize how like much meaning you put on your own triggers, like that they need to like sort of make sense, or
mm,
really like there's just this power in being aware of them and
mm,
acknowledging them. And then I think later, which I start to suggest a little bit in the book and in one of the articles that I've had published before, that I put in the back of the book, this idea of, starting to play with them once you know them, and feel safe enough to sort of revisit them maybe, and create new associations with them. Um,
mm.
so I had invited you, I don't know if you had time to think about any or not, that come to mind. I'm happy to list mine first just to like put it out there. I think the biggest trigger for me for a long time was the smell of fresh flowers. Um,
Mm,
that stale floral cemetery flower bouquet rose smell. Mostly because after my brother's passing, my mother kept all the flowers that everyone sent and gave around the funeral in the house for like 2 weeks, and probably a few days past when they should have been there. And so I think that's like my strongest one that comes up. I won't
mm,
explain the rest of them, but new car smell, the taste of metal in my mouth, um,
mm,
oncoming headlights, extension cords, driving in the rain, uh, suicide scenes on TV or film that are poorly done, especially um, gaslighting, sirens, hospital smell, which is might be very specific to me. And then there's specific songs, obviously, and then I have severe and shifting weather changes
Mm.
in like sort of one day or one week, like really big shifts. Seasonal is really difficult for me because I lived in a place where two of the biggest losses of my life happened in Toronto, where there's 4 seasons of the year. So it's so seasonal, those phases
Mm.
of grief. And then moving to California, I got really used to not having to deal with those triggers,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially with my brother and my father both died in the summer, so it's like very specific to those phases of grief.
Mm.
And then just whenever pain shows up in certain parts of my body, it's extremely triggering for me. I start to get worried that, oh no, like, pain that I've recovered from is going to come back and I won't be able to get rid of it. And so that's what came up for me. What about you?
Thank you for sharing yours. Even hearing yours helped kind of expand my list. And I would say, so heights. So like watching a movie where someone's climbing, that does it for me. The sound of people eating, like food, like yeah, chomping or drinking water. It used to be a really big activation point for me, especially as a kid. Now I've built some resources around building capacity for that. Um, Feeling trapped. I mean, you named it as gaslighting. I would call it as well, like feeling trapped in the story of someone else's mind, of what they've made up about you or what they've constructed. And even though their story is their reality, it's so far from my reality that it's a sense of feeling trapped, which is a trigger. Um, those are my big ones. Sometimes, it's also like depending on the state I'm in. Like if I'm feeling overwhelmed, a text message can be triggering. I'm like, why are you interrupting my limited capacity right now? And it's like, no one knows how I am, but like that's the element of being triggered, is like it's really personal. It has nothing, it a lot of times has nothing to do with anything or anyone around us. And
Thing when I
yeah.
text you at 10 o'clock last night to think about your triggers.
Oh, yeah. Well, I also get triggered by people asking me about triggers.
Yeah.
Uh, it was 1 o'clock, 1 a.m. my time, but I didn't mind. Uh, and there's this, and I'll say like the word trigger is often a trigger for people from a psychological perspective, psychophysiological perspective. And, also have my own bias around the usage of the term trigger. And I'll kind of explain both. Often, in a very like pop psychology context, where like, you triggered me. And, like you'll hear that, I'll see or hear that a lot, especially in teaching, and see like how material, like people's will get very upset about like, hey, that material, or you didn't say a trigger warning fast enough. And if we normalize triggers a little bit more, that first of all, the idea of them came from like the research on PTSD, saying like, hey, there are specific sensory cues that flood someone's ability to be in their present experience, or present with what's around them. It's literally a flood. It's an overwhelm in the nervous system. So that got kind of more generalized in the population of like, I'm being triggered, which we've gone so far out with using that language of trigger that often we don't recognize like, hey, I'm actually just having an experience. Because there are no neutral experiences. Every interaction, everything you read, everything you see on television, everything you scroll through, you're having a physiological reaction to, a psychophysiological reaction to. So we are beings of response. And, if we go, oh, I'm having a response and I'm not appreciating that response, we often call it a trigger. But the reality is you are constantly being triggered. You are constantly in response to the world and all the stimulus in the world. And if we normalize that a little bit, then we might become less reactive to the idea that we're having a reaction, a response. And so for me, it's really, it's different from I'm having a response to I'm having a hyperbolic response that's flooding my entire system. And I'm no longer in the driver's seat of what sensory data I'm attending to or where my attention is or how I can manage the situation. And that's a really big gap between the two. And it's important that we discern the difference between them, else everything is a trigger. And, when often in the training programs I teach, one of the first conversations we'll have is what happens when you get triggered. And I don't actually talk about what I say is like, well, first of all, what do you notice in your body in response to that word? You already have a response, a assessment, a judgment, a bias around the word itself. And so you using the word in relation to a response in your body already throws logs on the fire of your own response. It makes it more intense, more extreme than it actually is. And what a trigger really is it's a sensory flood or sensory, it's a little sensory data that opens and that activates our whole memory system of every other time we have experienced something like what it is that we're being quote unquote triggered by. So I see the color green. Every other time I've seen the color green, it's like the light bulbs of those memories turn on. And all the feelings associated with those times flood the present moment. And so I have an experience. And if it floods beyond my capacity to process or metabolize it, then we have like a situation, one that it means I'm no longer in, as I said, like the driver's seat of my present moment experience.
That makes
so
sense.
yeah. So I think it's helpful to deconstruct what a trigger
So
is
cool.
and what it's become in terms of the generalized use of it in language.
And I think that this is going to be a perfect segue to sort of getting into the addicted to drama piece of it as well. For those listening, when I use the word trigger, I'm talking about in the second sense that you meant of I am aligning that with my post-traumatic responses, like where I have to stop what I'm doing and take a break because I'm literally not, like you said, in the driver's seat. It's like, bringing me back. And so that can be very difficult when part of those triggers obviously surround driving, because driving. So you have to literally pull over, and stop and breathe. And it is one of those things where I notice it's a real trigger when I'm flipping into, after years of work, talking to myself like a child, where I'm like, okay, yeah, okay, all right. And it's just like fully like, I fully acknowledge what this is, what's going on, and that. And I find, which is like sort of the segue, it's like, I do think that your book's fascinating, because I think if you ask anyone if they're addicted to drama, they'd want to say no. And if anybody, if they know somebody, if they're addicted to drama, they'd say yes immediately.
For sure.
The person that you're thinking of has probably popped in your mind. For everyone listening, you can pause right now and go take the quiz on Scott's website and see if you are addicted to drama. I wasn't, but the thing is what I can do, and I'm hoping to be sort of the vehicle of this for this today, is I can admit that for a long time, I maybe had some wires tangled around how being addicted to drama maybe kept the memory of the people that I had lost alive, and gave me the space that I obviously wasn't getting to express, process, and live within my loss, because felt, which is the reason, I wrote my book, is like that there is this sort of expectation for me to fix my grief. And as long as that expectation existed and that belief in me existed to fix my grief, I was in a place where I think I was a little addicted to drama, even if drama was the only time that would create that opening for me to have these feelings. You sort of looked for opportunities where, okay, this is one where you're going to be allowed to sort of have some of that anger from my brother or my dad's passing, and it can live in this moment, and it will look like it's about this moment, like it's about this hockey game or about, whatever, Monopoly, God forbid, play Monopoly with your siblings after losing one sibling, and you'll learn a lot about how addicted to drama you are. But, so for me, I am so happy that I was in a place where I'm receiving this book where I can, kind of nod and smile and go, oh yeah, 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 yeah. I remember that. I remember.
Mm.
And also just be in tune with the residue or the little parts of that might exist in different ways, and being gentle about that, and like everything, like curious and compassionate. I think if you approach this book from that place where
Mhm.
parts of all of us, I think, are addicted to drama, and for good reason,
Yeah.
And I think when you approach it from that place of kind of being curious and compassionate about it, I found it was very interesting. And I feel like 5 years ago, I would have been reading it like, and then wanting to like point out everybody I know who's the drama, But I feel kind
Yeah.
of just going, oh yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, that really resonates. That really makes sense. And God, I'm so sorry you were feeling that way, that there was no space for you to honor the grief or the PTSD or what was coming up, or
Yeah.
the jealousy. So it's like anytime death came up or whatever, it was like, okay, this is our chance. We've got 5 minutes. You're in the
Yeah.
hot seat, and because society's saying it's okay for these 5 minutes because a
Yeah.
celebrity died or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So anyways, I just wanted to say thanks for writing this, first of all, and for just like opening my mind to all of this, because it is just very interesting. And I'd love to kind of hear your response to kind of what I just said, and
Mhm.
also how this might tie really deeply into people's grief processes, and acknowledging that might be a very secret personal thing, and that's just hopefully you in your car right now in your podcast. But you can
Mhm.
lovingly be, I think, addicted to drama, and it's something that can really change the way you think about things.
Yeah. So I think what you're naming is so common for many of us, and it's an element of an addiction to drama, which is that we might be moving towards the drama as a way of avoiding the trauma,
Hmm.
and finding certain depositories where the bigness of our feelings that don't necessarily end up allowing us to metabolize and process them. So I walk around with some loneliness, and then so I'm driving in LA and someone honks at me and I explode.
Hmm.
And it's really like that ache of the loneliness that's perpetuating it, that I'm not really that angry, but it's just like I've been boiling up, making venting in my own mind, like in the loneliness, also creating the stories of like why people aren't calling me back quick enough, and all of that is boiling up. And then in the explosion at that person who's honking at me, I've released this like cathartic energy. And it's the same thing that happens, what we were talking about in a trigger. It's like, oh, I have this flood of emotions and flood of feelings. And oftentimes we'll go, you triggered me, and I make it about you.
Hmm.
And I deposit that energy onto someone or something else. And that's the same tactic that happens with an addiction to drama. It's an avoidance technique. It's also a way of feeling alive in a state of numbness. So, what we know from trauma is that there's a an element of numbing that comes in to protect us. It's preservation. But at a certain point, that preservation seals us off, locks us off from ourselves to the outside world and the outside world in. It becomes an armor, a block. And it's lonely, and it's cold. And it is, we are in constant grief.
Hmm.
And then we have to numb to that grief. So I call it isolation pain. And then and we're walking through the world, we're moving through the world with this pervasive numbness that's protecting us. And when we can't feel ourselves, when we can't feel others, it reinforces that sense of aloneness. And so these moments where we can rise, create an emotional response, or be in situations that rise above the threshold of numbness and allow us to feel something, it's almost like a confirmation that we exist, a confirmation that we are alive and we belong. And so there's this whole dopamine reward system that goes, hey, you do exist. These fundamental primal needs of your sense of existence and your sense of belonging are being met. Whatever you're doing, do it again.
Mm.
And so we get entrapped in this cycle that helps us feel alive in a state of numbness. And that's so many of us have experienced pain. So many of us have experienced trauma. And I think there's less and less venues of permission and space and time to process those in a healthy way, as opposed to even a performative way.
Mm.
And in this performative way, even on like social media, it's more about us getting the likes. It's more about us getting the attention and what we call a dramatic narrative than the opportunity to process and metabolize the pain and the trauma. And so if we're not processing and metabolizing it, it stays there.
Mm. Yeah, I'm like, as you're saying that too, it's really lighting up, and this may resonate for you too, as someone who is also a professionally trained actor, or performer. That really was sort of a safe place to process, feel all of those emotions, where actually you're being asked to and almost applauded for sort of the wilder it gets.
Yeah.
I'm always drawn to those like scenes where they used to call me in acting class the nuclear reactor, where being right under, and then right when it was time to break, a director or a coach could be like, now, and it was, but what that reactor was for me was always all of my trauma. And I remember being younger and thinking like, wait, if I process this though, will I have access to this level of emotion in my work? Like, will I be able to kind of do that? Because I was I was definitely calling on it and feeding off of it. I had one memory I could think of, I remember, and it was like turning a nuclear reactor on in my body. And it was just like, and then like capping it for that perfect moment when the character kind of snaps or has the emotional breakdown or whatever. But it's like, so it's interesting how we find spaces basically to play house emotions we're not getting to feel, but it's safe and it's allowed, and it's within that. And I think maybe it was a good thing that we were actors and doing it in a place where it was really welcomed, because otherwise it can be happening. I think about like fights that aren't really fights, like small things in the grocery store, like getting cut in line, like as you said, in traffic. I think we see a lot of this in traffic. Like, is that really about
in workplaces, gossiping? It shows up in so many different ways of even in making tasks more difficult than they need to be. Like there's a way in which the friction becomes part of the feeling experience. And like you said, there's a feeding off the emotion as opposed to processing it. The emotion's not actually in motion. It's not going anywhere. It's like you're throwing logs on a fire by revving yourself up and keeping warm from that fire, and then getting mad that there's a fire and then complaining about it.
Yeah. The circle of life and death.
The circle. And I remember thinking like, oh gosh, if I process my trauma, I'm not going to be funny anymore. And humor was my currency of love. So I could make friends. I could keep my family's attention on me if I was provocative and funny. And so it was really an identity crisis to go, oh shit, if I let go of this trauma, I may not know how to be humorous. I may not know like that sense of timing that is so imperative to make jokes, to stand up, to be a performer.
I feel that for sure. That's definitely always been one of mine. And it's interesting, I think too, when part of, I think, what was very therapeutic and cathartic, and I'm sure you've had this experience now too with this book, is in writing mine, I got a lot out. And I'm not as interested as I used to be in talking about any of it because I'm sort of in a different place right now. And when you were talking earlier about that numbness, I lived in
Mm.
for almost a decade without knowing,
Yeah.
it's, I once had a psychiatrist explain to me that, especially with PTSD and trauma, but there's a certain point where you're no longer sort of putting glasses like lenses on and off, and it's like you're wearing contact lenses. So you don't know anymore
Yeah.
that you don't have the agency to take it on and off or to realize when you're on a scale of 1 to 10, you're just in a 10, you're wearing contacts all the time. It's the way you see the world. And
Yeah.
only in coming out of it and feeling healthy lately, in the last 2 years that I really realized like, whoa, yeah, like I was pretty numb,
Mm.
and it's like my find the funny, which like would probably, be at the end of the episode is like I'm in this experience right now where I'm constantly like texting friends and voice memoing friends and being like, I just ate this sandwich and like sandwiches are so good. Like, and it's like, and they're like, yeah, Addison, what are you talking about? Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
that's just an example, but it's everything. I feel this sort of like a
Yeah.
vampire in a movie. Like, I can feel the blood in my body.
Yeah.
Every sense is heightened, and
Mm.
everything that's funny is 10 times funnier, and everything that is like sad, like when I'm rewatching embarrassingly Brothers and Sisters, that reminds me of my family, that TV show for back in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm like bawling like at every episode. And I remember in all those numb years, like I'd watch like, Grey's Anatomy with a friend and she'd be like bawling her eyes out. And I'd be sitting there being like, what are you doing? And it's
Yeah.
so I'm so available to my experience again that,
Yeah.
that you really realize that in that middle time, that there is that serious numbness, and I can
Yeah.
see how it's natural. And I just want to take away the negative connotation to anybody who maybe needs to privately admit to themselves that they're feeling a little bit of this addicted to drama, because
Sure.
obviously that's natural if you're in that feeling that numbness, to try to see, well, what circumstance can make me feel human again, how can I
Yeah.
feel like
Fill the void.
matters, yeah, like,
Yeah.
and it is
Yeah.
dangerous. And, I did it during my 20s in Hollywood, like within dating, within figuring out who I was, within all of that, in like a very validation based industry and social circle. And like, I'm grateful having this conversation that like I got out alive, and I'm not being dramatic. Like, it was a lot on my
Yeah.
plate to look
Yeah.
back, go and get to speak to people like you and read this book. You're going, wow, that was a lot. That was a
Yeah.
lot. What I was kind of getting at was like when I now that the book's been out and I've talked about it a lot, I'm now in circumstances for the first time in my life where I'm trying to figure out how to navigate a social setting where I don't need to talk about any of that, where
Mhm.
that does come up. And obviously it's very difficult when you say, oh, I wrote a book. Well, like, well, what's it about? And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like dating or friends or anything. It's like, it's very difficult to get around, but
Yeah.
there's this true healthiness around me being able to go, I'm looking to like have this entire experience without needing to explain that the number one thing I've been celebrated most for is resilience. Like
Mm.
my PhD, the fact like
Mhm.
non-fictional boy who lived, like that
Mm.
it is, right? So it's just been this really interesting moment. So this book came at that perfect time where like I can see the contrast, and then also like, moving into the light. So if anybody's listening right now and they're kind of nodding, even if it's just silently for themselves, um, obviously on May 2nd, they will get the book because I'm sure this is stirring inside of them. But for beginner steps, where you're just
Yeah.
maybe acknowledging, hey, I am feeling the need for some of this stuff that they're
Yeah.
picking up right now. What's the gentle approach to just acknowledging and getting used to, or starting to deal with that in a meaningful way?
Yeah. So, I mean, just starting to recognize awareness is the first step in going, how did I get from starting to settle and relax to starting to think about what I have to do tomorrow?
Mhm.
What are all the ways I rev myself out of settling, out of comfort, out of ease? And you might say, oh, well, this news story came on, or this person texted me. And we could blame the external factors. But if we remember back to the beginning about being triggered, it's like, it's your response.
Mm.
and to give yourself and recognize you actually have more agency in your response. So how am I revving myself up and out of settling? Because that's a key feature in addiction to drama, is because settling feels dangerous because it brings us too close to the pain, too close to the void that we have been working so diligently to fill. And so I might rev myself up by thinking about an ex. I might rev myself up by like continuously thinking about that fight I had or that conversation I had that is over. I might have an argument with someone in my head. I might, um, create a story about why someone's not texting me. I might create a bind, which is like, oh, I need to get my house cleaned, but I don't want to pay someone because I should be able to do it, but I don't have the time to do it. And so like, that's a bind where I create situations where there is no win. And so I can only be stuck in the energy, the stress response of revving myself away from myself. And so awareness of all the ways you in your life may not allow for that softening, that ease to be present. When you stop blaming other people for it and you start taking yourself out of the game of hide and seek from yourself and recognize, ooh, I may be contributing to my own suffering. Or another way of saying that, I might be contributing to my own lack of ease. And that's a really hard thing to acknowledge. It's a very vulnerable space to be in, to recognize our own contribution to our own dis-ease or anxiety within life. Because it's easier to either put it out on other people or just say, I don't know where it's coming from. As opposed to recognizing, following the beacon back to you. You're unconscious. Clearly, no one is consciously like, I'm going to wake up today and make myself suffer. You know, like, well, maybe. But the actions one chooses to engage in, the thought patterns that they can do, it's like, oh, I'm feeling a little sad. Oh, I noticed I flipped on Adele to sort of turn that sadness up to a level 9 or 10. Like, did I really need that? Did it validate me, or did I actually just throw a little fuel on the fire of the emotion? And what is that offering me? So even starting to ask yourself these questions, what am I really hungry for? What is the underlying need below the intensity, below the exaggeration, below the way of like what's under the hood, so to speak, of like, oh, if I'm starting to settle and I start thinking about all the things I have to plan, if I go back to the settling and I say, what's underneath the hood? What are the feelings and the unexpressed feelings and needs that might be there? And can I make just even a little bit more connection with those? Over time, that will take us out of the constant reflex to rev ourselves up, to stress ourselves out of settling, out of comfort, out of ease.
I love that. And there's something sort of magical here of when this episode comes out and have this this gentleness and this time of noticing. I feel if you were to listen to this episode and pre-order the book, you then have a couple weeks to just gently notice when all of the stuff that we've talked about today comes up, and also gently notice without judgment maybe who's around you that might be addicted to drama as well. And that is one thing that I just wanted to touch on too as we begin to wrap up today, is there was a lot of extra grief for me around having to separate myself from those that were addicted to drama, because I was living in such intense circumstances of survival that the sort of, making something out of nothing type people, it was just with no judgment. It was just something that I couldn't add to the fire. Like you said, that fire was burning and I was dealing with my own stuff at that time. But I don't know if this is the Canadian in me or what, but I felt very bad when I had to create that boundary, and when I had to admit to myself, like, this is not helping. And, as you're talking about all that, I'm going like, yeah, like if your idea of a good time is to watch certain women on Bravo scream at each other for hours on end. Like it's just so interesting, like that there's a little bit there too, there's
Oh
the
yeah.
that we do. And I I'll admit I tried to go back because everybody right now is talking about Vanderpump Rules, and I was just like, I don't understand the memes or whatever. And and I also like know of these people from my time, here and whatever. And I went back and I tried to watch it, and like the way I felt after, like the awareness, and I'm like thinking about like these arguments I got into 10 years ago and who
Yeah.
was right and like all the stuff that it brought up. But it was just like such an interesting like case study to be like reading this book at the same time as watching, something like that. And look, I mean, those shows are made for a reason. There's a
Yep.
lot of people that are attracted and addicted to watching other people's drama, quite literally,
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so that, I just think there's something there to kind of get curious and compassionate about too. Maybe it's not so much in your life, but you are sort of like, seeking out these
Yeah.
drama-filled moments.
Yeah. I mean, why do we go see movies? Why do we go see live theater? Why do we watch any of these things? Um, and it's true. It's like I see so many posts in response to my book about like, oh, love watching the drama, zero interest in actual drama in my life. And I'm like,
Yeah.
can you really discern that between where it shows up in your life and watching it? And maybe it sneaks in a little bit because here's the reality is nothing we consume is neutral. So stress is contagious. You are actually having an emotional roller coaster with them as you're watching it, as you're in the theater. And we all, there is something thrilling. There's an endorphic experience when we get to go through that emotional roller coaster. It's part of our own chemistry. So watching someone else go through it actually has similar effects on our own physiology. And that's often why we like it. We like the thrill. We like being able to talk about it. We like being able to gossip and vent about other people's gossiping. And it makes us feel like we're part of something. We're included. We're in the in group. All of those things. And it's really important to recognize it is contagious, meaning you are actually part of the drama. You are not a neutral spectator ever. So whether you're enabling someone when they come to you and they're venting, and you're like, oh my gosh, tell me more, spill the tea. You are not only enabling their attachment to drama, but you're part of it. You are part of it, receiving the benefit of it. You will have the same withdrawal symptoms from it, and eventually the same levels of tolerance for it that mean you need more to feel more.
Hmm. Wow, it's making me want to dive into this current issue of how, specifically in the gay community,
Hmm.
how everybody is obsessed with and loves every housewife on Bravo. But the second they put five gay men doing the same thing on TV, they
Hmm.
all hated it. Everybody didn't want to see it. They want to hate watch it. They want to cancel it. And it was just this very interesting thing of, well, why don't you like what would be representing yourself behaving the exact same way?
Yeah.
It just, oh, that's an interesting double standard, like,
Yeah.
okay,
Wow.
if, a Salt Lake City housewife does it, but if a guy's doing it in WeHo, then, like, it's just like, oh no. And so it's just been like an interesting time to just be like, oh, okay, also what kind and flavor of drama is everybody sort of addicted to?
Yeah. What's your flavor of drama?
Maybe I should put like a trigger warning / spoiler alert on this episode. If you want to enjoy Bravo for the rest of your life, don't read this book and don't listen to it. Like I have to say, like when I've gone back now, it's not
Yeah.
enjoyable. And the
No.
only time I do go back now is if like because I know somebody, and so
Yeah.
but it's still my relationship with them, and then I'm sort of seeing what's going on TV. But like it's
Yeah.
I can't enjoyably like watch it. Like it was wild to me. last week, just being like, no, like I feel sick. Like I just like
Yeah.
needed that. Like, and I'm like, why would I want to watch this? And all those loops are there of, if people hung over and then you're watching hours of that type of TV and that
Yeah.
kind of all in,
Yeah.
but
Hours of those roller coasters. I've seen one episode once of a housewife, and I just was like, huh, this is an interesting study. Um, and as someone who's been on reality, I've been on a reality television show, and I can say that there was nothing reality about it, except that it was a hyperbolic sort of version of reality. Like I was told to restate things and redo things, and can I say it more expressively? And and it was all so manufactured. So, it's funny that we are saying that this is reality television, but the reality of it is that it's dramatized.
Mhm.
So and if that is a representation of reality, we're in trouble. Might not want to read my book.
Yeah, for real. And I think many people are going to be very interested about that. And I think you also
Yeah.
hit on something that my only interest now is sort of this meta, like because I know everything you just said, like being a long time LA resident and knowing people on these shows for years,
Yeah.
it's like watching the like fake drama of the
The
drama.
fake drama.
You're
Yeah,
like
that
there and you're kind of
yeah.
able to laugh because
Yeah.
you really, but some people on some couches are really, thinking this is
It's
the
the real deal.
think it works so as a test to be like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm not that addicted to drama, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Also that too, I think, that's there. And sometimes
Yeah.
like you were saying, you're sort of upping the ante,
Mm,
what of the extremes to kind of
yeah.
hit, if
Yeah.
that is a thing for you. And I think the whole thing is just really interesting. And if anyone can approach this conversation in the book again with just like this gentle, compassionate, curious lens. Because, I'll admit, when I hear the word addicted and drama, like 49 minutes ago, I've been like, I'm triggered. Yeah, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We're getting into the find the funny. But like it is sort of funny how like that is something that somebody would say, like, oh, that sounds triggering.
Wait, my poem wasn't the funny?
Uh,
Oh shit, I got the order wrong.
Actually, yeah, I forgot to call back on the codfish and
The codfish. You should have called back. I'll give you one more shot. I'll say some things, and you can do a callback.
and then I can get back to it. I think you're just sitting there like you're dropping all this wisdom, and everyone's just still sitting there being like,
What about the codfish?
"Look, what
Whatever happened to that when you got beta carotene poisoning?
is there
Um,
anything to open up as we begin to find the funny on why you said codfish?"
oh, I have no idea. I had cod for lunch.
Oh,
So I guess I was just free. Was it free balling it? Free
like a 101
associating.
improv where they say just say anything, and you look around the room and you're like chair, door,
Oh
wall.
yeah. That's sort of like Freudian technique, the free association,
There you go. There
or
you go.
maybe it's Jungian, or one of those early folks in the psychology realm. Uh, yeah, I mean, reality shows, I could say a lot, what's crazy too is that what we have replaced gossip magazines and reality shows, and every person who has a social media account has become their own gossip column, has become their own reality show. And so if we know, I know from being on the inside, like you have to exaggerate things. You are told to redo things. It's not authentic. So if we're transferring that knowledge into the fact that everyone is their own reality show on social media and their own gossip column, what is the divide between the authentic self and the social avatar they've created to garner the attention, to maintain an audience?
Mhm.
And that's feeding this process that we're calling addiction drama. And to go back, yeah, the terms are triggering. And I purposely wanted to choose a provocative title, that comes with consequences of like certain, news and media not wanting to engage because they're like, oh, that's not a happy title. That's not a positive title. because they're already in their bias and in their trigger, as opposed to going, oh, maybe this is shedding light on a shadow side of trauma,
Mm,
which is exactly what the book is.
agreed. And that opportunity to, even if it's in the slightest way that this still exists in your daily life, like getting,
Mhm.
take a microscope to that little bit and like
Yeah.
residue. It's just been like, it's been great for me to like be where I'm at in my healing process and in my own work. And then like at a place where I might say, oh, I don't need to read this book, reading it and being like, oh, like there's just this residue left. And
Yeah.
like how fun to kind of play with that and just, and also we'll have an episode later in the season around boundaries because that's one of the week, but also starting to really make sure you have boundaries implemented for those around you that you notice are bringing this into your life and are addicted to drama. All right, we gotta segue. Where do you find the funny in life? What makes you laugh, or what's recently made you laugh the hardest?
God.
No.
Tickle Square. I thought that was funny. I enjoyed it. It tickled me.
I blocked that out.
What'd you say? You're gonna cut it out?
No, I blocked it out.
You
Tickle
blocked it out.
blocked it. That's
How
it.
could you block out Tickle Square? That's so rude. Rude.
You're just making
Uh,
sure that I can't cut out your acrostic poem now. Like
you're right. I
almost
have
when
trapped you into a poem which I find funny. A
let's-
terrible poem at that. I find the funny all the time now. I mean, I think in every opportunity, like there's a way in which, when a moment needs some ease, I would say I might drop in add a little humor, or I think humor and the funny is just should be part of the flow of life. And I've actually, been enjoying doing all these podcasts and talks about trauma and drama and just finding the humor in it, because like you know uh, it's simultaneously sad, and maybe it's because of my upbringing and my own long lineage of drama addicts that I also can go back and go, damn, that was funny too. Like my relative who got upset that we were all poking fun. It was mostly my uncles who were doing it, poking fun at my relative. And it was at Thanksgiving, and she stormed upstairs, packed up luggage in her own house. She was hosting the Thanksgiving party, packed up her luggage, slammed the luggage down every stair in Minnesota in November, stormed outside without a jacket, and went right past her car with her luggage, pulling it through the snow, and came back like 10 minutes later and didn't say a word. And I'm like, damn, that is both crazy funny and really sad, because
Yeah.
like it's like, finding the humor and really the empathy, and going, wow, that was a moment for someone where they got flooded by triggers and rolled down the hill of drama and could not stop themselves, even at the point of being frozen outside in the snow to prove a point, to continue the performative nature of that, the intensity of that emotion.
Mhm. I think you'd get along with me and my siblings well. We have the
We
same.
should play Monopoly or some other board games.
I was being interviewed and
Yeah.
I said like there's this really interesting thing that happens when you let humor in as a tool.
Mhm.
I remember going back and it was just because it's like it's just naturally who I am. I was
Mhm.
to part with that on top with parting with other, people
Mhm.
and things in my life. But there's this kind of Seinfeldy moment where
Mhm.
it's a horrible situation, but sometimes you're sitting in like a morgue or a hospital room or wherever,
Yeah.
and just being willing to ask, but what's kind of funny about this right now? And
Yeah.
whether it's just like the personality of the person, like I don't know, like I remember like just a very specific person like that was like showing us caskets, and I know that's not funny, but like there's just something that if I allowed it, if I just shift into that gear, there's
Yeah.
actually like a lot that's hilarious about all of this.
Yeah.
And so you really like, I've found that I really seek out the people who maybe aren't addicted to drama anymore, but because they're able to really like laugh about like just how real shit gets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, like, I mean, that stuff for me is just, and my sister, like, there's this one laugh that I only hear my body make when my older sister, like, she knows exactly that sweet spot of like, is it
Nice.
evil or is it so true that I'm on the floor laughing? You know, it's just like, it's right there. And it's just, you know, we're able to laugh about these things of, and also like the way we behaved, and maybe for at points like when we were sort of addicted to drama, like we recall and we're like, yeah, and then remember you did that, and it's like, what was wrong with me? It's like, well, you were intensely grieving and in shock, like, you know, there's so
Yeah.
long, but now that can be hilarious. That doesn't take
Yeah.
away from honoring anything, or you know how sad grief can be. I think just letting that in, and I just every day I'm just like, God, that's my number one tool. It just always is, because I can, even with the triggers and all of it, just to like,
Yeah.
okay, like, you know, being
Yeah.
able to have that moment of brevity. All right, I imagine people are going to be trying to figure out where they can find more of you. Where can they do that?
I'm over here. And the other places they can find me is online. You can go to my website, dr.scottlyons.com. And as you mentioned, there's a quiz where you can take it and see if you're addicted to drama, or if you have a propensity for drama, we should say, or if you know someone who has a propensity for drama. So there's some different questions for that as well. It's a fun quiz. It's short. It's only 13 questions. It's a much truncated version of the one in the book. And I'm also on social media at Dr. Scott Lyons, and Twitter. Not Twitter. What's the other one? TikTok. Can you tell how old I am?
What is the other?
What's that young whippersnapper technology? I'm also on Instagram, where I do more shows, more stand-up shows of
7 nights a week, guys.
7 nights a week.
Thank you for being here today. As we check out, I'm going to check out first with one word. I'm going to say giddy, and I'm going to give you the last word. How are you checking out today? That's definitely a feeling.
That's definitely a feeling. It sounds like a little bit of a horse. It has a little like horse movement with it too. Yeah.
We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
Well, Grief Club, that's the show. If you enjoyed it, please let us know by liking and leaving a review. This will help as many people who may need what we're talking about find it the fastest. Remember to honor the journey, and when that gets tough, find the funny.